Okay, so today we are looking at day 7. This is the start. I always warn people, this is the start of arguably the hardest part of this class. Oh, well, the hardest part of this class for sure. Arguably the hardest part of the Sochi program. The next like 5 days, right? And so we are going to go through, we got 5 days dedicated to our 5 different sections of the body, just like we have our 5 like areas that we're looking at during like an overhead squat. So we're going to look at the foot and ankle complex today. We're going to get into the knee. We're kind of working our way down from the bottom up. We're going to work on the foot and ankle complex, the knee, the lumbopelvic hip complex, the shoulder, and then we'll end with like the cervical spine. So what we've got to do is, if you look in the back of your book, you'll notice there's that massive list of all of those muscles, right? Well, we gotta like work our way through and get familiar with those muscles. You're not gonna be tested on here's what I always tell people, because some people go, do I have to memorize every muscle? And I don't want to give you a simple yes or no answer to that question. Here's the most realistic answer to the question, should you memorize every muscle? You will not be tested on every muscle, but you can be tested on every muscle. Does that make sense? You're only going to have maybe 10 questions that mean that you absolutely need to know. They're going to say, what is the prime mover during a ball bridge? You know, you're maybe only going to have 10 questions like that. And that means that the answer to that question is the gluteus maximus, right? But, and it's only 10 questions, but it could, you know, we don't know if you're going to get a ball bridge as your question. We don't know if you're going to get a bicep curl as your question. Like, there's a pool of questions, and they're going to pull 10 of them, you know what I mean? Or 20 of them, or however many it is. So it's not that you will be tested on every muscle, but you can be tested on every muscle. No. Sorry, I just got my email from Kaiser and they're like, the flu shot's here. And I'm like, I gotta get poked. Sorry. I hate shots. I hate them. I'm a child when it comes to shots. The last time I gave blood, the guy was like, breathe, you're gonna pass out. And I was like, I'm not gonna pass out. Yeah, I'm fine. And he was like, and he looked at my hand, and my hand looked as if I had dunked it in a pool of water because I was sweating so much. And that sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I mean it. I mean, it literally was just soaking wet. And it went from bone dry to soaking wet like that because I'm like, I hate needles. But you bet I'm going to get that shot. All right. So let's go ahead and intro everything here. Let's talk about like the first section of muscles. We're going to start it off easy. The ankle doesn't have that many. The foot and ankle complex, we don't have too many muscles to talk about today. We're going to kind of ease you in. And by the way, guys, sometimes you're going to see some muscles show up on multiple days lectures. Like, you know, your hamstrings, for instance, they assist in a little glute work. You know, they make the hip move, but they also make the knee move. The lat is going to show up in everybody's list. So you're going to see some muscles double up on certain days here. We're going to talk about them in both directions. You know, we're going to talk about them on both days. But let's look at like why knowing all this stuff is so important, right? So if we're looking at like, you know, just kind of introing, if we're talking about the foot and ankle complex, you got 26 bones in your foot and ankle complex, right? You got the fibula coming down here, your tibia, here's your talus right here. This is one of the most important bones. This is actually what, you know, this is the actual foundation where this giant tibia bone is like sitting on top of, right? And so if you start to lose mobility through here, that's where we often see like Robert, were you talking about how you get like kind of tight calf muscles, right? Do you ever get a pinching sensation? Do you ever get a pinching sensation in the front of your ankle when you're trying to do a calf stretch? Like a pinch right here.
No, not really. I mean, I don't know if I've ever noticed it or not.
Okay, no, that's a good thing. I'm glad you don't. But you'll get somebody who sometimes does, and that's one thing. We spend a lot of time talking about like muscles and tight muscles, right? But one thing we don't really, and I wish we would spend a little more time on it, are joint restrictions. where the ligaments will actually get tight, or a bone will be moved into a place where it's really not supposed to be sitting. So a lot of times you'll see this tibia here will actually sit a little lower on the talus than it's supposed to. It's like the muscle was so tight that it just eventually like moved the bone a little bit. And it's like you'll end up with a joint restriction because it's really not designed to be able to move through that range of motion. So how do you fix like a joint restriction? Well, you actually have to move the bone back manually. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily grab your client's tibia and pull it, but you'll look like this. You'll do a joint restriction ankle. And so what you'll do to fix it is you'll have them do a classic like, stretch like this, but you'll actually tie a resistance band around the bottom of their ankle. You'll tie it around this little talus right here, this bone, and pull the bone posteriorly. You actually pull it backwards. So you'll do a stretch and it'll look, oh, good Lord, that's not what I wanted. Okay, am I gonna get, are we not putting the picture up on the internet? There we go. So you'll do this, you'll tie a really big, heavy resistance band, and that band is actually gonna pull the bone back into place. And that way, when you do that stretch, you'll actually get more out of it. Now, Robert, if you don't have that pinching sensation, you don't need to do this. So don't worry about that. But if you ever feel like a pinching in your ankle, that's like all the stretching in the world might not help because you got a joint restriction. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about like some of these bones. By the way, when I was a kid, here's a fun fact for you. Like I said, 26 bones, I broke 22 of them. When I was a kid, I jumped out of a tree in a Batman costume and completely liquidized my foot. I shattered it jumping out of a tree. And I walked around the fair all day the next day because my parents took me to the fair. And then right as we were getting to, so I was just breaking it all day further and further and further. And then right as we were leaving for the day, I was like, that's it. I can't move. My parents were like, what? Get up. And I was like, nope, I'm done walking. And they were like, what? And then like they lifted my like, pants sleeve, and they were like, oh my, and my ankle was like huge. So had to take me to the ER, and they still have the x-ray of it. It's just like just broken bones everywhere. But luckily, I was like, I think 5, maybe 6. Kids are like rubber, I totally bounced back. So you got 26 bones, 19 muscles, a whole bunch of little intrinsic muscles, which we're not even talking about when we say muscles. You got 100 ligaments. You got all these ligaments that tie the bones together. And so like your foot and ankle's job is to like propel your body. It's your foundation for everything, right? So you're going to see all kinds of problems arise in your clients if their foot is too rigid, which means that it cannot pronate or supinate the way that it is supposed to, or if it remains in pronation past a certain stance. That's another common distortion that we're going to see. And so when we're looking at the foot and ankle, we need to be aware of that, especially when we're talking about like the way we're supposed to walk versus the way we're supposed to run. The distinction between the two is walking is where there's always at least one foot in contact with the ground, but running is where there will be a moment where neither foot is contacting, because you're basically leaping from foot to foot to foot. So both are up. And so like obviously running has much higher impact. And so that's where we start to see like problems arise. If you have all this rigid, if you have a super rigid foot and a really immobile ankle, and you try to run with all that like high impact, you're going to have a bad time, right? You're going to end up with some type of injury. So the most common injuries we're going to see are things like ankle sprains, right? So ankle sprains involve like what a sprain is it's the stretching or tearing of a ligament, right? So a pulled muscle is usually like a pulled tendon or a pulled, tear in the muscle itself. But a sprain is where we see, like an ACL tear. You hear about that in the NFL all the time, right? That's a sprain. That's a sprained knee, basically. We don't really have to call it that because, we just call it a tear, because usually ACL tears are like all the way, it's just like disconnected. But like that's what a sprain is, right? It's a stretching or a tearing of a ligament. And so an ankle sprain, it's the number one common sports injury. I'd say this is an important sentence. I've seen this show up on multiple NASM homeworks. So it is the most common sports related injury, ankle sprains. And what happens is because you end up you don't put as much pressure into your ankle when you're walking, you end up like losing strength in your medial glute muscle. And your gluteus maximus for that matter. And so, what ends up happening is you're walking like this, right? You're not putting any weight in. So you're just kind of like hobbling along. And, that's a big exaggeration. Like let's say you're 2 weeks into an ankle sprain. It doesn't look like you're limping like this anymore, but you aren't pressing as hard into that side and you're pressing harder over here. So what ends up happening is like this glute ends up tightening up because it gets too strengthened, and this glute gets weaker, and then you ended up like shifting during your squats, right? And so that's an ankle sprain, right? Very, very, very common. And there's a couple, there's a lot of different versions of ankle sprains that we're going to see here in just a sec. But the most common is going to be the lateral ankle sprain. So remember, lateral on the outside of the body, right? So the most common one is where excessive inversion causes an overstretching leading to a tearing of that ligament. So actually, I don't have a picture of it here, but I'll pull up a picture. So lateral ankle sprain. So it'll look like this. Don't I get a picture of it? Hold on. Hold on. Really? Nope. Okay. I'm just making stuff up in my brain. So you'll see somebody will step like this. They'll roll their ankle. And what that will do is that will tear one of these two ligaments right here, usually this one. And so like that's the sprain that we're seeing there. You could also sprain this one here, right? Your fibula connecting to your talus there. And so like, very, very common ankle sprains, right? You can see all the different like kind of common ligaments here. These are all lateral ankle sprains, and they all happen because of like landing on that foot sideways. So imagine somebody who has like excessive eversion, right? And so, this is what happens when you step like this. There's the tear. You can kind of see it there. That's inversion of the ankle, right? It's inversion because the foot's showing towards the midline, right? So if somebody is just spending all day in eversion, right? They spend all day like this with this excessive eversion. These ligaments on this side, they're tightening up. They don't have any reason to stretch because they're in a shortened position. Then all of a sudden, when somebody takes a step like inverted, which they should be able to do, right? Now they can't do it. And so it ends up tearing the ligaments. The same thing is true on the other side. We can see, medial ankle sprains as well, though it's much, much less common. So there are ligaments over here. So if you spend all day in ankle inversion and then all of a sudden you roll your ankle the other way, you theoretically could sprain these ligaments here as well. Then there's high ankle sprains. High ankle sprains are usually really rare, except for in like contact sports like the NFL. High ankle sprains. Actually, we'll just pull up a different picture. So high ankle sprains are actually all the way up here. That's not a great picture. What am I doing? Give me a better one. Oh God, look at that. There we go. That's not a bad. No. Oh, look at that. There we go. Excessive movement there. Look at that. That's eversion, by the way, and simultaneously. I want a good picture. These are all lateral. Yeah, like I said, it is rare. This is why we're seeing so many pictures of the lateral ones. All right, we'll go back to this one. I don't like this picture because it's low quality, but basically a high ankle sprain is all the way up here. And sometimes you'll even see where your tibia and your fibula, the muscle that like kind of holds them together in the middle, that'll also tear. And so these are pretty common. Usually if you are wearing like a boot or a high-laced shoe or something like that, and then you cause like too much motion. So you'll see it in like hockey players or sometimes football players, depending on what type of cleats they're wearing. Sometimes you'll see it in NBA players, but that's kind of rare. I mean, that's just a shoe. It's not like they're super stiff, but sometimes they are. So that's what a high ankle sprain is. So you got the medial, the lateral, and sometimes you'll have high ankle sprains. And then we've got like problems in the back of the ankle, right? So we go back here, we can start to see things like an Achilles tendon rupture or Achilles tendon sprain where you actually tear this from here and that will disconnect. That's really, really bad. Or sometimes you'll see like that Achilles tendon will then wrap around the heel and become the fascia on the bottom of your foot. And we'll see a very, very common injury called plantar fasciitis. And plantar, this is your plantar fascia down here. It's this webbing that kind of on the bottom of your foot. And plantar fasciitis is inflammation of the plantar fascia, right? It's usually what people will describe is they'll have a lot of pain in the morning. So they'll say like, oh, I get this like stabbing. It feels like somebody's stabbing the bottom of my foot when I wake up. And that's because like you have all night to kind of let this stuff relax and it tightens up. And all of a sudden when you try to take your first step, you're trying to stretch it and it's like, nope. And so it just pulls on the bone and you feel this really painful stabbing sensation. So it's usually worse after they've been sitting for a little while and it kind of cools down, or if they've been sleeping and it cools down. And all of a sudden they start walking again. You're also going to see Achilles tendinopathy, aside from just having an Achilles tear. If you have like, if this tightens up so much because you've got a really tight soleus, right? If this gets so tight that it starts rubbing on the notch on this bone here, and it starts getting this rubbing sensation, you'll get inflammation. And here's the easiest way to picture inflammation. This is what I always do with people. Take your hands and go like this and start rubbing. And now don't stop for the next 24 hours. You know, like, that's inflammation, right? You got to remember your muscles are just rubbing on that bone all day and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, you know? That's really what inflammation is. And so when you have like runner's hip or runner's knee, that's sometimes called IT band syndrome, plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendinopathy. And by the way, tendinopathy is just it's, you know, tendinitis and tendinopathy, they're essentially the same thing. You know, plantar fasciitis is an example of tendinopathy, right? These are all just words that kind of describe inflammation. Anytime you hear an itis, that means inflammation. So it's tendinitis, it's inflammation of a tendon. Tennis elbow, even like certain shoulder impingement's a little different, but like just anytime you get like this kind of hot, you know, achy, painful sensation, sometimes even like you'll feel that inflammation even just after sometimes like a really heavy lifting day at the gym, and you walk away and you're like, oh, my joints, you know, like if it was like a really heavy day, that's kind of like inflammation. You're just feeling inflammation. Imagine that, but not going away. And then we've got, here's a really common one associated with the ankle, medial tibial stress syndrome. So remember, medial is towards the midline. Tibial is your tibia. So that is your main shin bone there. Stress syndrome. And so what that is it's the midline part of your shin experiencing too much stress. This is much more commonly known as shin splints, which is a very common thing that people deal with. And so what'll happen is you'll get inflammation because there's actually some fascia wrapping around your bones, and you will fracture that fascia basically, which your body will then create a whole bunch of inflammation around. And it's painful, you know? Anybody in this call, and by anybody I mean you two, you ever get shin splints?
What is it again, Brad?
Shin splints, where you get that kind of like, it kind of feels like somebody punched you in the shin, like up and down. It comes after like running.
Right.
Sometimes people will feel it. You ever get that?
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah. So that sometimes happens when like your foot can't really keep up with the rest of your body. So one of the best things you can do for it is just do a lot of balancing exercises, and that'll, or toe scrunches, where you actually pick towels up like off of the floor and then put them back down with your foot. That's actually one of the best ways to kind of strengthen the bottom of your foot, and it really has a super positive effect on things like shin splints. So that's a really common, really common injury that a lot of people deal with. All right. So we are really quickly. Let's review these bones here, right? So the bones of your foot and ankle complex, right? You are going to have your tibia right here. That's your main shin bone that travels up, right? This is like your main base of support for like your lower leg. Sorry, I'm trying not to sneeze, but I'm gonna fail. Hold on. Okay. Good guy. So that's your tibia right there. That's your shin, right? But then you're also going to have the side, you know, like that big ankle bone that sits out that you feel, you know, sometimes you hit it as you're walking by stuff. You're like, oh God, right? That ankle bone on the outside, that's your fibula. So you got two legs at the two bones at the bottom leg. And that's actually a common structure. I don't worry about knowing this, but here's your weird fun fact for the day. That's actually something we see in mammals. It's called the one bone, two bone structure. And the one bone, two bone structure is something we see basically in all mammals, and where when you look at our arms and legs, it goes one bone, two bones, and then we'll have a wrist, so we'll have lots of bones, and then you'll have fingers and you'll have digits. And so it goes one bone, two bones, lots of bones, digits. You can see it in your arms, you can see it in your ankle, right? One bone, that's your femur. Two bones, that's your tibia and your fibula. Lots of bones, that's your ankle and foot, and your digits, those are your fingers. So now let's look at, I don't know, let's pull up a picture of a dog skeleton. It's almost October. We can get into the creepy stuff. That's not accurate right there. That's I'm pulling up a bunch of Halloween stuff by mistake. So we see one bone, two bones, lots of bones and digits. If we pull up even like a whale, shockingly, because they are mammals, you'll see it's definitely differently shaped, but look, you can kind of see one bone, two bones, that's actually the shoulder. One bone, sorry, I'm not a whale expert. One bone, two bones, lots of bones, and they do have digits. I mean, they kind of look like a fin, but that's what's kind of fun. That's one of the things that makes a mammal a mammal. It's not just, you know, live birth or whatever. So kind of a fun one. There's your weird fun fact for the day. Sounds like a weird Dr. Seuss book, right? One bones, two bones, lots of bones, digits. I wish I was better at like rapping. I would totally have made that rhymed. So there's your tibia, there's your fibula, and then there's all the tiny little bones of your ankle, right? And so you're gonna have what's called your navicular. That's this one right here, and it's meant to kind of sit below the talus, which is right here. The talus is kind of where your tibia sits, and it's sort of like the interim between like the ankle proper and like the bottom part of the foot, right? So like the talus is there to kind of slide a little bit. These are all cuboid bones, right? These are kind of almost square-shaped bones. They're short bones. They're designed to kind of slide across each other. Then you're gonna have like in this little section right here, these are all what are called your cuneiforms. And again, they're meant to do a lot of sliding. You got one kind of unique one over here called your cuboid, and it's almost perfectly square shaped. And then you got this row right here. So this row is what is known as your metatarsals. And the reason they're called the metatarsals is because this group right here, if we don't refer to them as like, you know, their own bones, right? We called this the navicular, we got all the cuneiforms and the cuboid. If you were to just group them all up and categorize them, we would call those your tarsals. And so your tarsals are basically the group of bones that make up your ankle. And then your metatarsals are what make up the palm of your foot, right? The bridge of the foot. And then you've got your toes, which we're going to call your digits, or we're going to call them your phalanges, I guess is actually a more common term. So the same structure is true up here, right? You've got your one bone, right? That's your humerus. You've got your radius and ulna, and then you've got your wrist, palm, and fingers. The wrist are your carpals. That's why we call it carpal tunnel syndrome. Your palm are your metacarpals, and your fingers are your digits or phalanges. Same true as in the leg, right? Femur, tibia/fibula, ankle, that's going to be your tarsals. And then you're going to have the bridge of your foot, that's your metatarsals. And then you've got your digits, which are your toes, and those are your phalanges. So that's kind of a general overview of all the bones that we're going to be moving around like crazy today. You don't need to have your bones memorized so much. They sometimes come up in the corrective exercise, but you'll have more time to study them when you get to corrective exercise. For now, we're really just going to worry about the muscles, but I wanted you to kind of get a good overview because you can see, like, look at all these like square bones here. They're all sliding, and so when you get too many muscles that are really rigid and you lose flexibility in here, that's why that causes so many problems. Or the ligaments, right? When you can't attach these bones properly with the mobile ligaments, that's what causes so many problems. All right, so really quickly before we actually get into the actual muscles here, I want to give you a quick guide to labeling your muscles, okay? So NASM is going to use its own terminology here a little bit. And so here's what you need to know. And this is the key to understanding how we talk for the rest of this class. So you need to understand what an isolated function is, and you need to understand what an integrated function is, okay? So an isolated function, and unfortunately these are not test questions or anything, but you need to know like how to speak this way in order to understand the rest of this. So what an isolated function is, this is more commonly referred to as a muscle's action. Ask any other traditional kinesiology class, they'll call it a muscle's action. And what a muscle's action is, what an isolated function is it is the job of that muscle whenever it is contracting concentrically. So go back to our concentric conversation, right? What concentric is when a muscle is contracting for a greater force than a resistive force. It is overcoming something. When my bicep shortens, right, when it squeezes, it's concentric, okay? So the isolated function is whatever a muscle does when it is shortening. Got it? Cool. Now, integrated function is basically the exact opposite. The integrated function is whatever that muscle does eccentrically and isometrically. So the integrated function is the opposite, right? It's when Batman is acting like the Joker. It's when it's doing the exact opposite of whatever it does. So it's whatever a muscle does whenever it is lengthening or when it's stabilizing. And so the integrated function, right? So concentrically, my bicep squeezes this way. Eccentrically, my bicep relaxes this way. So when we look at that, right? If we look at like this, what do we call this? This is in the sagittal plane. If I were in the anatomic position, it would be this, right? So this is a sagittal plane movement. So this is flexion, and this is my elbow joint. So we call this elbow flexion. So if I were to ask you what the biceps brachii does, which is the name of this muscle right here, it concentrically accelerates elbow flexion. So its isolated function, its action, is to concentrically accelerate, because that's what concentric means, you're accelerating something, elbow flexion, okay? So that's how we're gonna speak for the rest of this course. We're gonna say this muscle accelerates concentrically, joint that we're talking about, movement that we're talking about. Does that make sense? That's every muscle we're going through.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. And then we're also going to do its integrated function, which is exactly the opposite, right? What's the opposite of elbow flexion? Elbow extension. So we're going to say eccentrically, instead of accelerating, we're going to say decelerates, elbow, same joint, extension, because that's the opposite movement. So concentrically accelerates, elbow flexion, eccentrically decelerates, elbow extension. So that's the job of this muscle. And now you know everything there is to know about the biceps brachii. and which is not the muscle we're talking about today. So I think we're only getting into 4 muscles today. 1, 2, 5 muscles. 5 muscles. We got the peroneals, right? So we're gonna get into 5 muscles today. So muscles of the lower legs that we are looking at. We are gonna start with a very commonly underactive muscle, which is your anterior tibialis. And it's the muscles we're gonna see, they're gonna be highlighted in yellow. So the anterior tibialis originates up here on the upper portion of your tibia, and it runs down, and you'll notice, it ties to the ankle right over here. It actually runs down, crosses over the foot, and it ties right here. So you can understand, if you look where it's starting from here and going to here, if you were to like pull it this way, right, what that's gonna do is that's gonna pull up your foot towards your face. It's going to perform what we call ankle dorsiflexion. You are gonna pull your toes towards you. So the anterior tibialis, I'm gonna do a lot of camera moving in this class, by the way. Your anterior tibialis is in charge of going from here, which is ankle plantar flexion, to here, which is ankle dorsiflexion. So that is my anterior tib. And if you look, you'll see yourself, you can see that muscle squeeze. If you look down, or if you put your hand on your shin and raise your toes up towards you, you'll feel it squeeze. So how we have to label this out, the way we have to say this, its isolated function of the anterior tibialis is to concentrically accelerate dorsiflexion. Now it does do one other thing as well, which is inversion. And that's because you can see here, look at where it's tying. It's also going to cause a little bit of turning. And that's the thing about muscles, right? They don't always just have one job. So not only does it pull your toes towards you, it also inverts the ankle. And ankle inversion is this, right? It's where you're turning your foot this way. So my anterior tibialis squeezes like this, and it squeezes like this. So now you know exactly where you have to put a weight. If you were to like try to strengthen my anterior tibialis, you know where you have to slap a weight onto my foot, right? You're gonna say, okay, well, I want you to strengthen by pulling your toes like this, and I want you to strengthen by pulling your toes like this. So we're gonna go like that with the ankle, right? And you're gonna tie a resistance band over here. Now that's why, you know, we're looking at the kinesiology here. Now the integrated function is, like I said, we're just gonna flip it. I honestly, guys, when you're studying this the first time, I tell people just focus on the isolated function. Don't worry about the integrated function. For now, just focus on the isolated, and then later all you have to do is flip it to understand your integrated function. So we said concentrically, that was when the muscle's lengthening, when it's shortening. When the muscle's lengthening, it's eccentric, right? So its integrated function is to eccentrically, and eccentric is because it's lengthening, that's not accelerating, that's decelerating, right? You are lowering the weight, right? You're catching something, you're decelerating it, lengthening a muscle. So that's, instead of concentrically accelerates, we're gonna say eccentrically decelerates. And then rather than say dorsiflexion, we're gonna say the opposite. We're gonna say plantar flexion. So it's lengthening when your toe's going away from you. And rather than inversion, we're gonna say eversion. So we just flip everything around. That's all the integrated function is. Remember, Davion, we were talking about opposites last, or no, sorry. I was talking to Jesse about it. But one of the easiest ways to memorize things is to memorize the opposite, right? If I'm trying to get you to guess Superman, right? I can't say the word Superman, right? Because that would just be giving you the answer. But I'd say the opposite of Lex Luthor is, and you would say Superman, right? The opposite of up is down. The opposite of left is right. So we're just flipping everything around. It's a good way to kind of memorize, right? You memorize the opposite. So isolated function of the anterior tibialis is to pull your toes back towards you. I'm sorry, the main job of the anterior tibialis is to pull your toes back towards you. Opposite of that is to push your toes away. It also does inversion. The opposite of that would be eversion. And so this is why, Robert, we were talking about your girlfriend, right? She's got the excessive eversion. Her feet are pushing down like this when she's squatting. So she needs to get better at pulling her toes this way. That's why that anterior tibialis is on the list of muscles we talked about this morning that she needs to strengthen. She needs to do that toe pull. And then the other thing that it does, and this is one thing that you're also going to see on the integrated function, you will always see it followed up at the end with isometrically stabilizes and then whatever joint it's attached to. So, you know, my bicep earlier, right? Isometrically stabilizes the elbow. Ankle isometrically stabilizes the arch of the foot or the ankle, right? So don't worry too much about that isometric stuff. It's just isometrically stabilizes and then wherever it's attaching. All right, so that's your anterior tibialis. Now you've also got your posterior tibialis, which you can actually kind of see here, right? We're showing this from the back, right? We're showing this, it runs along your tibia, and then it wraps around the back here. So it's actually kind of laying underneath your calf muscles. And then ties around, and it actually ties on the opposite side. So we were here with the anterior, right? It's wrapping on this side of the foot. Check out the posterior. It is wrapping on the outside, inside of the foot. So anterior is on the inside here, and this is also on the inside here, but it's coming from the other side, right? This is coming from the front, this is coming from the back. Anterior, posterior. Anterior, posterior, opposite side, right? Does that make sense? Stop me if I move too fast through this. Normally we get to do this on a physical whiteboard. So anterior tibialis, posterior tibialis. So this also, this one, because it is in the back, when it contracts, it's going to do plantar flexion instead of dorsiflexion. So that means that it's going to assist almost like a calf muscle, right? But it is also going to do inversion of the foot because it's tying, where it's tying is the same place as the anterior tibialis. They're both inserting right next to each other. So whereas your calf muscles usually do eversion, the posterior tibialis also does inversion. So that's why this is also a very weak muscle for a lot of people. Most people are really good at everting and they struggle with inverting. So many of our clients, so many people spend all their time doing this one, the eversion, right? Where the bottom of their foot, they're flattening out and they're showing the sole of the bottom of their foot almost away from their midline. They need to invert to get back to neutral. Now, obviously, we don't want to see excessive inversion. You know, we don't want people walking around, you know, like this either, right? Where they're just like, but we also don't want people walking around like this, which is what we most commonly see. We want to get people back to neutral, right? We want to get them on the flat part of their foot without their foot like flattening too much. Posterior tibialis. Oh, and by the way, these are in your notes. Anterior tibialis accelerates dorsiflexion and inversion. Posterior tibialis accelerates plantar flexion because it's in the back, but it also does inversion. So the anterior tibialis and the posterior tibialis work together to do inversion. And we know that most of our clients do a lot of eversion, the opposite of inversion. So that's why these two muscles are very common muscles that we need to strengthen. We often really, really need to strengthen these tibialis muscles. One of them does plantar flexion, but they both do inversion. And that's why when you're strengthening these muscles, when you look at like strengthen the anterior tibialis, when you're working on that, it's really simple. You're just going to tie a resistance band. Oh, this is a GIF. Oh, perfect. Oh no, she's going the wrong way. No, that's opposite. That's not what I want. This is a calf exercise because she's pushing this way. I want her to pull. So what's going to happen is you're going to tie a resistance band away from the foot, and she's going to pull her toes back towards her. And this is a guy. You pull her toes back towards him, right? That's what we're saying. This is the anterior tibialis. But if you strengthen the posterior tibialis, you'll change the angle slightly, and you're going to go to the side like this. And then you're going to scoop the ankle towards the midline. And so like you're going to pull up just like before, but you're also going to pull inward. And so there are actually versions of this up on NASM's website, NASM's YouTube channel. So we see NASM posterior tibialis. And so it'll look like this. See how she's got it tied off to the side and she's inverting the ankle. So she's going to go from here to there, and then she'll relax to here. So concentrically accelerating, eccentrically decelerating. That's the posterior tibialis. The anterior tibialis looks like this, where it ties directly away, and all she's doing is pulling her toe back towards her. If you get a client with flat feet, both of these exercises are your best friend. These are both just really great ways to strengthen those muscles. Okay, so concentrically accelerates plantar flexion and inversion, just like before. Again, most of our clients suck at inversion, so we often need to strengthen them. And then it eccentrically decelerates instead of plantar flexion, right? We're saying dorsiflexion instead of inversion. We're saying eversion of the foot, and then it's also there to stabilize the ankle. Questions on those two? How you guys feeling?
Good.
Not too bad? Not too bad. Cool. So weird. I can hear me. I can hear my echo.
In this video, I'm going to show you guys my favorite tibialis anterior
Brent,
activation.
get out of here. By the way, if you ever want to subscribe to this guy's YouTube channel, this is arguably one of the smartest people. This is my favorite YouTuber who I am literally trying to copy in my own career. Mo actually knows this guy. I think he went to school with him. But this guy's Brent Brookbush. He is a physical therapist / trainer. His YouTube channel has some of the best information. And Davion, you remember last night we were talking about continuing education units, how you have to earn those? This guy offers classes that'll help you earn those. If you don't want to go with NASM, you can go to his website. And his stuff is really great. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge, huge fan of this guy. This guy and this guy, Squat University. These are my two, biggest channels on YouTube. Squat University, Brent Brookbush. Both those are amazing.
All
right. So there's my plug for the day. I'll have to give them, I'll have to be like, hey, you owe me royalties. All right, let's look at the opposite side of the joint. Let's move to the other side of the joint. We've been looking at dorsiflexion. Let's look at plantar flexion. We were looking at inversion. Let's look at eversion. So the soleus. This is the short calf muscle. Although it's not actually short, we just kind of think, I often think of it as short because you don't really see it until you see the bottom fibers. But this is the difference here. You can see the gastrocnemius, right? It lays over top of everything. Your soleus is underneath. And this is what's unique. Look at the gastrocnemius here. Do you notice how your big calf muscle, it starts up here. It originates on the femur, and your soleus originates on the bottom part of your tibia. And that's why they do different jobs. Robert, do you remember yesterday, and David, I think we were showing this to you yesterday as well, when you're stretching out your gastrocnemius, you need to go with a straight leg, right? So if I was doing a calf stretch, and I was stretching my gastrocnemius, right, I would pull my ankle back, and I would go with a straight leg like this. That's my gastrocnemius. And the reason that's my gastrocnemius is because it needs to have a straight bone. I need to be pushing this bone, my femur, like this in order to stretch it out. But my soleus doesn't attach to this bone. It attaches only to this bone down here. They both insert to the same spot, but this one starts up here, and this one starts right here, and this one starts right here. So in order to get my soleus, I would do the same position, but I would bend my knee. And by bending my knee, I'm going to stretch my soleus. So that's the difference between those two muscles. They're both calf muscles, but they start in different places. So the soleus is right here, and it originates and then runs down. So its job is to concentrically accelerate plantar flexion. So when my soleus contracts, its job is to go like this, okay? That's its job. That's it. Simple, right? But that's also why when you see somebody, right, remember, its job is to go like this. So when you see somebody who squats and they squat like this because they aren't bending their ankle, right, that's this muscle resisting stretching. You should be squatting like this, right? Your knees should travel forward. But if your knees can't travel forward and they just stay straight, you have to kick your butt out and lean like this. That's why the soleus and the gastrocnemius are overactive on an excessive forward lean. Or Robert, let's say it doesn't want to stretch. You squat down and you do this. Your heels come up off the ground, right? If you notice your heels pop up like that, that's the soleus going, no. I'm not stretching out. What are you, crazy? Right? You stretch me out, I'm going to tear. So that muscle's going, nope, and then it just puts you into plantar flexion instead. You'll often see that in people who do box jumps. They'll jump up and they'll land on their toes and they'll just stay up there. It's like, get down. So the isolated function of the soleus, and it, by the way, you'll notice this becomes your Achilles tendon, right? Is to accelerate plantar flexion. And then obviously we would say eccentrically decelerates, not plantar flexion, we would say dorsiflexion, because dorsiflexion is pulling the toes this way. And it's also there to isometrically stabilize the ankle and the foot. So that's your soleus. Gastrocnemius, almost exactly the same thing, although I will say this. In fact, you'll notice it really is exactly the same thing. Look at the definition. Soleus, accelerates plantar flexion. Gastrocnemius, concentrically accelerates plantar flexion. No difference, right? And then eccentrically does the exact same thing. Here's what I'll say though. This is where NASM got lazy. This is not 100% true. The gastrocnemius technically does a little more than this, and it's not listed in your books, but I want to give you just the verbal version. So look at your calves, right? Push your foot into the floor, and you'll notice there's two separate fibers to those calf muscles. I'm gonna pull up, let's pull up a bodybuilder. Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I cannot spell, calves. Let's take a look at this freaking calf muscles here, because you can get a great example. Good, he's so big. God, look at that. All right, so you see that little crease there, right? There are two separate fibers to your calf muscle. Your gastrocnemius has two separate sections to it. So that's hugely impressive. Good God, look at that. There's a shadow. His are so big. That's insane. So you see like the two separate fibers, right? Gastrocnemius. You're going to see lateral fibers and medial fibers. This is looking at a calf tear. Don't pay attention to that, but lateral fibers, medial fibers. So the medial fibers pull your toe in, the lateral fibers pull your toe out. They pull in the direction that they are kind of attached to. So that is one thing that we often see. You'll notice when you go to your NASM overhead, when you look inside of your book and you're looking at like the table that shows you the overactive, underactive muscles, is this gonna be high enough quality? No. Man, okay. I just want high quality images. Okay, you'll notice like when you see foot turnout, notice how it says probable overactive muscles and it throws in, it says lateral gastrocnemius, and then probable underactive muscles, it says medial gastrocnemius. That basically means that like the outside of the reason the feet are turning away is because the outside of the calf is over tight and the inside of the calf has been weakened. So like basically these two fibers that are supposed to work together to make you do this have worked way too much on one side. So this one's pulling and this one's just kind of relaxed. So this one's doing all the work and the other side's not doing it. So if you are going to give your client like calf raises, right? What you need to do is you need to point their toes slightly inward while they're doing those calf raises. so they can work the medial gastrocnemius. They should never be doing calf raises where their toes are pointing away and they're going to work the outside part of the calf. The outside part of the calf is overactive. The inside part of the calf is underactive. And they don't break that down that way in your textbook, which is kind of a crime. But those are the two separate fibers of your calves. Either way, though, if your client has an excessive forward lean, both sides are overactive. Stretch out their calves. We do not care, you know, don't strengthen that medial stuff. Just stretch it. Stretch the calves, strengthen the shins, right? All right. How you guys feeling about the calf muscles? Pretty good? Not too bad? Cool. All right. Robert's getting him. You're mastering the emojis like Irene. All right. Let's look at your peroneals. So there are a couple different peroneals here. Again, NASM got a little lazy. I mean, they're not getting lazy. They're just watering it down. They're just trying to keep it simple. But this is your peroneal group. So you get your peroneus longus, tertius. You get a couple different peroneals out there, but we're just going to call them the peroneals group, okay? And so the one they're kind of looking at is the peroneus longus. That's the actual picture here, but there's a couple other ones that are there as well. And this is actually running up on your fibula here, and then you'll notice it runs down, and then look at the, you can actually, it's hard to see in this picture, but it actually ties across the top of your foot. So it actually, I guess you can kind of see it a little better on the right side here. It ties, and then it's like boop, 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 boop. It kind of runs across the bones of your foot there. So let's see if I can find a better picture here. Peroneus longus. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell, right? Peroneus longus. There we go. So you can see it runs, and then, oh, there's your tertius right there. And there's your brevis underneath it. But that's your peroneals group. And it's gonna, actually, they're not showing it there. There we go. It ties across the top of the foot right here, right? So that's the peroneals group. So because it's tying to the top of the foot, when your peroneals pull, what that does is that accelerates a little bit of plantar flexion. Like it's kind of helping the calf muscles a little bit, but just like not much. But what it really does is everts the foot. When it pulls the foot, it pulls your ankle this way, and like, or you know, this way if it's on that side, right? It's pulling your ankles, showing the bottom of your foot away. And that is another commonly overactive muscle. This is a muscle that we do not need to strengthen. Too many people have excessive eversion and not enough inversion, right? So your peroneals, hold on a second. This wasn't a problem until the season started changing. So your peroneals do this. They turn the bottom of the foot that way. So that is a muscle right along the side here. And you can feel it if you put your hand here and rotate your foot, try to show the bottom of your foot away, you'll feel it contract on the side there. So sometimes you'll see people foam roll this. I don't think it's like super effective personally. I think it's a little better to get like a lacrosse ball in there. Or actually what I used to do, if I ever got like really tight and sore in my peroneals, I would actually take a spoon, like the back of a spoon, and you know, not the curved side, like sharp side, but the rounded side, and I would rub it and kind of massage that group. But your peroneals, brain foam roll looks like this. You're basically just gonna lay kind of on the side like that and get on the side of the ankle. If you have IT band syndrome, if you're feeling like a rubbing sensation on the outside of your knee, this is very, very helpful for you. Because, you know, you get your peroneals, they run up, then it gets the IT band, then it becomes the TFL. It all runs down, you know, this common line here. Just like your hamstrings run down and eventually become, you know, just like your calves. That runs up and eventually becomes your butt, you know. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the peroneals there. So how do you stretch that? Well, like I said, it does eversion, so you need to do inversion, right? So you can get a little bit of a peroneal stretch just by doing this, but it also does a little bit of plantar flexion, right? So one of the ways you can get this is actually to go back here and just kind of drag your foot down like that, and you'll feel a stretch on the top of your foot, and that's a good peroneal stretch. So that is the peroneals group. And that's really all we got. So let's look at our movements here, right? The movements you need to know that your ankle does. You've got dorsiflexion, that's pulling your toe towards you. You've got plantar flexion, that's pushing your toe away, right? So if you're moving the top of your ankle towards your tibia, right, moving it this way superiorly, that's dorsiflexion. If you're moving it inferiorly away from the tibia, that's plantar flexion. You've got inversion and eversion. Eversion is showing the bottom of your foot towards the outside, so that's moving away from the midline. Inversion is moving the bottom of your foot towards the midline. You've got, and then special ones, you got your toes here. I didn't put these in your notes, but you got toe flexion, which is squeezing, and you got a toe extension, which is extending. Toe flexion is what's weak, by the way, if you have plantar fasciitis. So that's why like those towel pickups work so well, or marble pickups. Seems kind of like a silly exercise, but it's really good for plantar fasciitis. Then you got pronation and supination. Now, here's the thing about pronation and supination. This is the thing that people always forget. Pronation and supination are combo movements. They do not happen by themselves. They are multi-joint motions. So pronation is a combination of both ankle dorsiflexion happening at the same time as ankle eversion and external rotation of the foot. So pronation is basically a flattening of the foot, whereas supination is too much of an arch. It is plantar flexion, inversion, and internal rotation of the foot. So when you see somebody who's got like a flat foot, that's excessive pronation. When you see somebody who's got excessive supination, they're gonna have too high of an arch. So if we look at pronation versus supination of the foot, there's one picture that sometimes you get to see where they'll show, it looks like an ink stain on the ground, and I wanna find a picture of it. So you can see here, right? Supination is somebody who's like they're inverting and their feet are turning slightly inwards, right? So supination, like here's a neutral foot. Supination is ever so slight internal rotation and inversion. So it would be somebody standing like this, way too high of an arch. Pronation is somebody who's going to turn away like that, and they're going to flatten their foot down by inverting, right? That's pronation. So look at like how much contact is with the floor, right? This is a normal arched foot here in the middle, but then see how there's just like not very much, there's a lot of contact on the outside, but not very much contact throughout the whole foot. That's supination. And then way too much contact with the foot. That's pronation. So that's a flat-footed posture, high arch, and normal arch. So those are pronation and supination. Most of your questions are going to be related to pronation and supination, but you need to remember that pronation is a combination of dorsiflexion, eversion, and external rotation. And you need to remember that supination is the opposite. I mean, honestly, guys, they'll probably just ask you about pronation because that's the bad guy. Rarely will they ask about supination, but supination is inversion, dorsiflexion, and internal rotation of the foot. All right, and then lastly, so we're gonna, by the way, these slides, they're gonna go in the same pattern every day. We're gonna kind of cover the same thing 3 times in a row. That's why it's like, we're gonna hammer you with this kinesiology, where it was like, okay, here's the muscles, here's the movements, here's the muscles and movements. So we're reviewing everything at the end here. Here's your ankle dorsiflexion. So if we look at it from the agonist perspective, right? Which muscles are agonists for which movements, right? If we talk about dorsiflexion, right? Those are the 4 movements your ankles can make. plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, eversion, inversion, right? Because pronation and supination are combos of those things. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So the agonists for what am I looking at first? Dorsiflexion. The agonist for dorsiflexion, pulling your toe towards you. The muscles you need to know that do that, that's your anterior tibialis and your peroneal muscles, right? They're calling it the peroneus, tertius, and which is sometimes known as the fibularis. Peroneals, right? That's what we wrote here. That's how your NASM book breaks it down. So pulling your toes back towards you, the muscles you need to strengthen to get better at that is the anterior tibialis and a little bit of the peroneals. I would honestly leave this alone. I would just spend your time focusing only on the anterior tip. Then for ankle plantar flexion, the exact opposite, right? The muscles that are in charge of that are the gastrocnemius here on the left, the soleus, which is here on the right, right? So again, this one's just on the fibula here, and it's on your tibia as well. And then this one is on the femur, right? But both of them share the same insertion point, right? They both insert to the same spot. They become your Achilles tendon, and then they insert. So the plantar flexion, right? Gastrocnemius, soleus, and then you can't really see it here, but running underneath it is your posterior tibialis. Again, you don't have to worry about that posterior tibialis until you get to these inversions, eversions. So then ankle inversion, right? Your inversion is going to be your anterior tibialis and your posterior tibialis. So a minute ago, the tibialis, anterior and posterior, these guys were working against each other, right? One was doing dorsiflexion, one was doing plantar flexion, but now they're working together to do inversion, and that's what's important, right? So again, because most people evert. So you're on the shin and you're on the back here, but they're both inserting in that same spot. And so you're either going to focus on learning how to pull your toe back towards you, or you're going to learn how to invert and scoop, right? So a resistance band is either going to be tied away from me and I'm going to pull against it this way, or a resistance band is going to be tied towards the camera and I'm going to scoop it this way. Scoop it this way. So that is focusing on that inversion, right? Then ankle eversion, which we don't need help with, is the peroneals on the outside, right? Peroneus longus, brevis, tertius longus. Don't worry about it. But that's your peroneals group. Oh, and then we do have the toe flexion. Don't worry about these. You're never going to be asked about the toes in individuals, but they're in the PowerPoint. So these are what's called your flexors hallucis longus and your flexor digitorum longus. And then you've got your hallucis longus and digitorum longus. Those are your extensor versions. So flexor versions, extensor versions. That's just what's squeezing your foot. They're located on your shin, actually, or not in the foot itself. But honestly, don't worry too much about the toe stuff. Unless you have like turf toe, it's really not going to come up. And even if it did come up, the way you fix turf toe is just pick it up or put your foot in sand and squeeze. We'll look at that in the sports class, actually. And that's actually it. I know it was kind of a short one today, which is a good thing because it was kind of a lot of info at a rapid fire pace. Tomorrow, we're going to have a much longer list of muscles. Tomorrow, we're looking at the knee. So you're going to have your quadriceps and your hand. I just pointed the wrong part. You're going to have your hamstrings and your quadriceps tomorrow. So the list is going to be a little bit longer. And then the shoulder is that's our longest list of the day. But how you guys feeling? Do you have any questions about any of those motions?
Feeling good. No questions.
All right, I love it. That's good. Robert, how you feeling?
Just got to memorize those terms.
Yeah.
And a lot of the motions that you have to do to get the underactive and overactive muscles.
Totally. So that's good. I was hoping one of you would say that. And I was like, I just got to memorize it. That's good because here's what I'm going to do. Let me put this back on screen share. Where is it? Where did I put it? I have a thing. That's not it. That's not it. Where did I put it? Oh, I know where I put it. Hold on. Sochi stuff. Desktop. Big. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to send this to you today, guys. If you want, you can print it. I don't need you to write it, although I think there's a benefit to writing it. And this is a giant list of all of the muscles we are going to be covering in this whole course. So you need to have memorized, well, I don't know about all 60, but it is a lot of muscles. Today, like I said, the list was relatively short. We got to about here. We got through these 5. If you make each one of these PowerPoint slides a flashcard, it'll work really well for you. And you can literally go File, Print, and then what you do is you just change it to, on your printing settings, don't go print. I mean, you can do print all slides, but don't go full page slides. Change it to 6 slides, and you can do vertical or horizontal, it doesn't matter, just do 6. And what that'll do is it'll print it like this, and then you can cut them out and put them on flashcards. And it's super, super, super helpful. I will give anybody who makes flash, and you can do it manually too. You guys can just open the PowerPoint and like, I had one student draw them, which is insane to me. I'm like, why would you go through that much work? But you can do that if you want to. But if you just write the name of the muscle and then you write its isolated function and you write its integrated function, if you make flashcards, I'll give you 5 hours of extra credit, which means if you're ever absent, it will cover you and you'll be covered for 5 hours. And it'll, I can't give you points. I can't like give you, if you had a homework that wasn't great, I can't do that. And I can't give you test points, but I can raise your attendance score. So I'll give you 5 hours and it should only, it should take you about an hour to do. But I'll give you about 5 hours worth and just send me a picture of your flashcards. Just go to the dollar store, buy a pack of flashcards and just write them out. Send me a picture. I don't need a picture of every one of them, by the way. Just send me a picture of your stack and I'll give you 5 hours extra credit. And I'll put that in the email today when I send it out. But that's for everybody. Everybody can do that. So if you know that it's like, look, I've got a dentist appointment to go to, or I was just feeling sick and I knew I was absent, cool, let's wipe it. Let's wipe one of your absences away. And yeah, that's it today, guys. If you don't have any questions, we'll get into the knee tomorrow.
Not at all.
All right, man.
All right now.
I'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right now.
All right.
Take care.
All right,
See you guys.
All right now.